I'm Alessandra Barrett, Senior Content Editor for JOC. I'm at our Container Trade Europe conference with Felix Hager, Vice President and Head of Ocean Freight for DHL Europe. Great to see you again.
Thanks a lot, Alessandra.
Now, this event brings together a great mix of people exchanging views. What are your thoughts on the current market?
Well, what we've seen since last year is definitely a lot more stable environment in terms of rates. So there has been really an effort made to, be more decisive in what is necessary to keep a stability in the market. That's very good. But there has also been two items happening which make me really concerned for next year. One of them is, for example, the introduction of the e-buff, the emergency buff in the first half of this year. I mean, it's not the fault of the shippers or the forwarders that all-in rate agreements with a fixed fuel factor have been agreed from the carriers. And in the end, then an introduction of an emergency surcharge across everything with an announcement of just a couple of days before it's actually happening. This is not really a way we would like to see things like this happening in the market. And next year we have, with the low sulfur coming in, a much bigger event of this turn. It definitely needs to be done in a more organized way than what we saw with the e-buff this year. And secondly, there's also again a tendency of very short-term validity rates coming into the market, specifically on the prepaid market in China, which disturbs really everything because shippers then start to wait for that period of a couple of days when they can ship the very cheapest, and it's really creating a lot of turmoil in the market, which helps nobody. In the end, the only benefit a carrier may have from that is that they get a couple of more containers at a cheap price on board of their vessel for one single journey, but it then disturbs the whole market price level. And I really recommend also there to put a bit of control into these kind of behaviors. What is also apparent in the market is a lot of carriers are starting to go into the market of forwarders. That's an interesting move, I would say, if you look at the whole market from an economic perspective. But I must say, being a forwarder, I don't really get that strategy, to be honest. Reason for that opinion of mine is that at least half of the value proposition of a forwarder is to provide flexibility and to put together from the asset operating entities in the market a bespoke solution for a customer. And I simply don't see how a carrier who has their own assets can tap into that value proposition. So half of the value proposition of a forwarder is kind of gets lost in the way these new companies are structuring themselves, and that's for me an issue. Secondly, I think we've heard this morning, 50% of the market is by now roughly in the hands of forwarders. So we are definitely the most important customers of the carriers, and also an important source of customer service, of selling, of flexibly utilizing your assets, and simply we don't like that move very much either. So we've seen with those carriers who are most at the forefront of bringing these forwarder-like services into the market, really our volumes going down, and I don't think that's a very a good movement at all, neither for us nor for these carriers. Yeah. So these are the two main themes that I gather from the conference, which are critical.
How are you seeing service evolving?
Service quality of the carrier is deteriorating. On the one hand, this has to do with the structural model. If you have bigger ships with more feeder services around them, that clearly creates an issue for schedule integrity. Everybody knows that themselves. If they use public transportation to get to work in the morning, if you have to change twice, then it gets difficult. Okay, that's inherent in the model. This has to do with cost. That's something I understand. Very difficult to organize this. What is actually bothering us more is the operating quality of the carrier. And with that, I don't mean the vessels, I mean the actual work in the office. Because if you see that certain carriers have 30% of their invoicing wrong all the time, this creates a lot of manual intervention for us or other customers and the carriers themselves with a lot of cost attached, because personal expenses is also for carriers a significant item, for nothing. This is total waste in the process, and producing an invoice is not creating any value whatsoever, basically. Yeah? So these kind of things really need to get under control, and it's of utmost criticality that the whole theme of digitalization goes into the direction of getting these wasteful processes out of the way, meaning create real possibilities for e-billing, create real possibilities to send data electronically, get rid of all the paper-based release notes and all these kind of things. This is, I mean, we always speak in terms of digitalization of these big funky things in the internet, but what is much more important is that we get our pretty undecent and unorganized processes under control by using electronic media, and there's definitely a lot of homework to do on the carrier side.
Now, a new theme at the conference is haulage. What are your thoughts on that as a topic of discussion? Is it really growing in importance?
Yes, it is definitely growing in importance. This is the area where infrastructure is most critical and where we see the most delays and the most hiccups in the transport chain happening. And so organizing the haulage better is a key lever to become more reliable in the actual end-to-end transportation. And it's one of the key value propositions that we try to bring into the business to do this better. And we see a real big uptake in specifically the United States at the moment, where merchant haulage is becoming increasingly important. It may be sometimes a little bit more expensive on the regular prices for some of our shippers, but what they do avoid is a lot of lost control in the chain, because this way, together with our shippers, we can do a much better job in controlling, for example, the merchant detention, for example, delays, for example, speeding up on the last leg because something is urgent, and that's in the end a lot of value that is brought to the shippers and consignees. And so and there's also a real lack of drivers in almost all mature markets, so I would say in North America and in Europe specifically, and this is becoming a big issue.
You spoke at the China Rail panel. What were the key takeaways from that panel?
Well, China Rail is really here to stay. China, and the reason is very simple. It's a new figure on the chess game, you could say, and everybody needs it sometimes. So I can only encourage all shippers who have not yet tried China Rail to bring this into their considerations when they design their transportation portfolio, because it's simply in the middle between air freight and between ocean freight. It's a real subsidy for dense air freight, if you speak about an LCL mode, for example, and it's simply something that makes the flexibility in the transport portfolio higher, and as such, it's also getting more mature in terms of the provision of the service, etc. So as such, it's definitely there to stay and will continue to grow.
Great. Well, thanks for taking time to sit down with me today.
Thanks a lot for the interview.
I've been speaking with Felix Hager, Vice President and Head of Ocean Freight for DHL Europe.